I have a blog called Chicanissima because I grew up, I was born in the 60s, so in the 70s when I grew up, all of this was the backdrop to what I grew up with. But I grew up here in Chicago, which we didn't really see referenced in the documentary. But a lot of this type of movement, maybe the players weren't as famous, but growing up here, a lot of the same movement was happening in Chicago. And in fact, Cesar Chavez, in fact, came to Chicago several times too, because the farm workers were not just in California, they were all over the United States. And so in my career as a journalist, from the time I was out of college to now, I've been writing about Latinos. I've been in Chicago for most of my career, but I worked in California for a number of years and also in Washington, D.C., where as a young reporter, I worked for a place called Hispanic Link News Service. And in fact, the founder and my mentor, a man named Charlie Erickson, was very close friends with Cesar Chavez because he lived in California for many years before he started the news service in D.C. with his wife, who is Sebastiana, who is from Mexico. And that news organization really has probably single-handedly trained more Latino journalists than anybody in the United States. And Charlie is responsible for the careers of many journalists who've gone on to work. I started with Charlie at Hispanic Link, and I wound up at the Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times, other people at the Washington Post or NPR or the LA Times. And so just give you a little backdrop of myself, to say writing about Latinos is something I've really dedicated my career to. And why it's important, I'll just share a little bit of my family story and then you guys can ask questions. So my mom was a farm worker in Texas. So she came from a little town called Carrizo Springs, Texas, about 45 minutes from Eagle Pass, and right there along the border. And she was the youngest of 13. And so they would pick the fields in Texas, and then in the summers they would travel throughout the Midwest and pick fields. So my mom remembers being a girl of 6 years old working in the fields. As you heard in the documentary, they're talking about children working in the field. She was a child working in the fields. And a story she recalls of getting her fingers spliced while they were picking beets, because she got spliced by a farm implement, and you can still see the scar on her finger. So it really had an impact on her. My mom was fortunate in that because she was the youngest, they would, pile up the truck and go from state to state to pick different crops, beets, cotton. And they wound up in the 1950s in Illinois, a tomato farm right outside Chicago. And they actually were like 13 kids, 2 parents. They lived in a garage. A garage was their home, and they were picking fruits and vegetables. And what's funny is I asked my mom, because I can't imagine that. I mean, I don't know if any of you, maybe some of you have parents or grandparents or farm workers. I've never had to do, hard labor like that as a child, in part because my mom and dad really emphasized education for us. But I asked her, what was that like, And, they would, basically there was no shower, they would just boil hot water by a fire, and especially when they were in Texas too, it was very rural. My grandfather would hunt rabbits, and they would grow their own produce. And to me, that just seems, being a girl from Chicago, surprising. But what most struck me about my mom says growing up this way is that she's we never felt poor. They never felt sorry for themselves. This was just the way it was. But yet, especially my mom's older sisters had this idea that there could be something better for them. Because farm work, and I've tried it. I spent a couple weeks working on an organic farm in Canada, and I'll tell you, it's hard. It is really hard. Very hard work. In fact, maybe we can get into a little bit about immigration, but most Americans won't do that job, and that's why you have a lot of immigrants who are farm workers. So the reason, the way they got out of farm work was because in Chicago, my mom's older sisters realized there were so many factories, and they told the parents, we can all get jobs in factories, and we'll make more money, and it's physical labor, but not as hard as farm work. And the parents agreed, and they all moved into the city, actually, to where UIC is now, and they lived there. And my mom was the only one who got to go to high school because she was the youngest, and they decided she could go to high school, but everybody else had to work. And I know that fact is hugely important to me, because if she hadn't gone to high school, I might not be a professor here at Columbia today, right? Because she was the only one who got to go. Everybody else had to work. And so you think about like what people, like you're all here in college, and I know it's not easy. You might have loans and your parents work and you might have to work, but you think like what person gave up that really hard thing for you to get education? Like I know that's why I'm here, because if she had never finished high school, the likelihood that I would have gone to high school or even gone to college, like all my siblings, all 5 of us did, it probably would have never happened. And in some ways it seems like so completely random that that happened just because she's the youngest, but yet that kind of shaped everything that would come forward. And I actually really did like this documentary. I saw another one in the series that I thought was a little not as deep, a little more surface, another one that deals with Cubans and Puerto Ricans, but I thought this one went much better in depth and in terms of covering the movement and the general themes. But the story too of what was happening in Texas and California, I mean, some of that also was happening in Chicago, because you had what you had is the story of my parents really, and how they came on the migrant trail isn't really all that different than, I mean, there are thousands and thousands of families in Chicago who have that story, maybe some of you do, that when Mexicans, in particular Mexican Americans, left Texas, they basically migrated to the Midwest and North for a couple reasons. It was for farm work, it was to work on the railroads, and to work in the steel mills. And so my father's family, who was also from Texas, he was born in Texas, they came to South Chicago because they had an uncle who worked in the steel mills. And so this is a very, very common pattern of migration for Mexican Americans especially. There's many people of Mexican heritage in Chicago who actually have the Texas roots. That's one common pattern. And then of course we have newer waves of immigrants who've come directly to Chicago starting in the 70s, 80s, and now you have people not even skipping Chicago and migrating to suburbs and even smaller towns in Illinois and Indiana and Iowa. So I think this documentary is important in giving you kind of the historical context of the Chicano movement. One other thing I'll share before I open up to you is, you know, for me growing up, Cesar Chavez was it. Like, he was the hero. He was our Martin Luther King. We were aware of Martin Luther King in part because my mom came from a family of farm workers, and so we, after my parents, they met in high school. 2 people from Texas just met in high school. Crane, which is on the west side near the 290, some of you may know that. And then they lived in an apartment building where UIC is, because this is a whole other story of all the displacement that happened when they built UIC, the University of Illinois Chicago. Their building was basically torn down. I can drive by it, and my mom's like, it's a university building there in the hospital area. And so they had to move, and so they actually moved to Maywood. So we grew up, when I was younger, partly in Maywood and then later in Oak Park. Again, stressing education, because our parents were like, well, they already got kicked out of the city by development. Let's go to an area where we think our kids can get a better education. But despite that, my parents were, in their own ways, they were activists. My dad was actually in the Brown Berets, which you may have heard of, or you can look up. And they would have meetings and activists, and so when people like Chavez came to Chicago, they would participate. And the way we displayed our activism growing up is we would go boycott grocery stores. It was like a family of 5 and 2 parents, and we would go boycott like the Jewel on North Avenue there in Melrose Park, or other stores. Just, you know, I don't know what my parents were thinking. We were all small, taking 5 kids and parents, and we would just get out there and we'd hand out flyers and ask people not to buy grapes and support the farm workers. But we weren't alone. There were a lot of families that did that, and friends that we have that did that. And I think actually, because there was some talk of, my sister recalls, because I was in elementary school, she recalls like people spying on us. I don't know if they were police or FBI, I'm not sure, but you know, we were, I mean, that was considered a radical thing, I guess. And then when Chavez came in, you know, my sister actually, who was about 10 years older than me, recalls going to sort of a organizing camp for youth when she was in high school. And so my parents, it was just really important that we, just even though we were one family, that it was really important that, at least in our local community, that we supported the farm workers and the work of Chavez. So he really was a hero and icon that we grew up admiring because, and the reason it's still important, because you might think, oh, everything's fine now. It's not actually. There's still farm workers, even though there are stronger labor laws, than before. There's still lots of threats to farm workers, in particular from pesticides. And even though there's no more grape boycott, it's still an ongoing issue that there's still a lot of a struggle. There's a really great documentary you guys should check out. It was produced by OI, and it looked at young farm workers working in outside of Chicago and how there's still migration, it's still happening. And there still are, there still are issues with farm workers, and especially with the health risks associated with farm workers when they spray the fields, and et cetera. So the last thing I'll say before I open up to you is, so Chavez was this huge influence in our lives. And then as a young journalist, I worked and mentioned with Charlie Erickson in DC, and I learned, again, even though I'm Hispanic, I didn't know everything about Hispanics, right? Just because I am one doesn't mean I know everything about them. It's the same thing. I learned about policy and immigration policy and how that works, and redistricting and educating and voting rights and all these issues that they were talking about. Because some of that's pretty complex stuff, and I really got my grounding in those issues in working for Hispanic Link. And then I was just looking around for jobs, and I found a couple opportunities. So I moved to California. I didn't know anybody, and I wound up working for a paper in Long Beach, California. And when I was there, working out there, the news came that Cesar Chavez had died. So this was a huge story, right? This iconic civil rights leader had passed away. And so myself and another reporter, we drove up to the Delano area, for 4 or 5 hours from LA, and covered his funeral. And I have to say that was one of the most exciting, emotional things I ever covered as a journalist, because here was this civil rights symbol that I grew up, I didn't know him personally, but just admiring, and the work we did on behalf of the farm workers as a family, and to cover his funeral. And it actually was quite an incredible celebration of his life. And there was a procession, but it was very positive and uplifting, and just seeing some of these, like Dolores Huerta, who I've actually interviewed. She's an incredible woman, incredible. She's smaller than me, and she's just an incredible force. And still around, she still travels around. She was in Chicago recently, and if you ever get a chance to hear her speak, you really should. But that was just really exciting to be there and see his funeral, and kind of in a way it felt like, oh, my life's come full circle here. I grew up, my parents having me boycott grapes and on behalf of the farm workers, and here as an adult, a young adult at the time, I was able to cover Cesar Chavez's funeral. So again, I think it's important that you all know this history and what came before, in part because one thing is immediately when Chavez died, another journalist and I went out into the street, and we're in California, we're in Southern California, and we went up to people like reporters do and be like, so what do you think Cesar Chavez has passed? And most of the people we spoke to who were Latino immigrants said, oh, you mean the boxer? Have you heard there's a Cesar Chavez boxer? So most of the people didn't even know who we're talking about. Now this is 20 years ago. And I thought, okay, I hope most of you knew who he was. But it's important too that we just remember our history, right? Because even in that case, I was like, wow, these people don't know who he is. That's like not knowing who Martin Luther King was, and it kind of just really surprised me. And I'll just say one last thing, that it's so important that you know this history and the struggles before, because there's all these issues, as I'm sure you know, have not been solved. And today, I don't want to get too political, but today we have politicians, I won't name names, who are using some of these same tactics. They are demonizing Mexicans. They are saying things that are just not accurate. And as a journalist, I live and breathe by truth. And so they're saying things that are factually not true. And why does this matter? It doesn't just impact Mexicans. It impacts all Latinos. It impacts all of us, because when you foment stereotypes, or worse, hate, that's a very dangerous scenario. And again, and the importance of voting too, that they talked about. I think we're going to see, hopefully, more Latinos vote. I won't tell you whether you're Latino or not, who to vote for, that you should vote no matter what, be registered, because I think more is at stake than ever before. All these issues that they're talking about, in Arizona, I don't know if you know, they've like all this movement to have ethnic studies, Latino studies, they're banning it. There are all these proposed pieces of legislation in just about every state. There's anti-immigrant legislation that's been proposed, some has gone further than others. So my point is just that so many of the issues that people fought for generations are coming back. Voting rights, the ability to vote and exercise your vote. Lots of states are passing laws to make it harder for people to vote if you don't have the right kind of ID. So many of these issues are still important today. And so with that, what questions do you guys have, or what were your impressions of the documentary? Anybody? No questions? What did you guys think of the documentary? Did you know all this history before? No? Did it surprise you, interest you?
I didn't know a lot of that actually, so it was very informative.
What surprised you the most?
I just didn't know too much about the farm labor movements, or even a lot of the civil rights movements that happened in Texas and California. So.
Right. And that's important too, because they did actually last year make a movie, Cesar Chavez, Michael Pena, so I thought that was pretty great. And you also had Selma come out. But yeah, when people think of the civil rights movement, they often just think of it. They think of Martin Luther King, and they don't realize what one of the people in the documentary said the civil rights movement was for everybody, and that there was so much happening, with Latinos in the civil rights movement too. Are there any questions? And what surprised you about the documentary? Anybody?
I was pretty surprised that I didn't know that this went on the same time Martin Luther King was doing all his stuff. Like, I had no idea. I just thought it was maybe a couple years after. Just the fact that there was two huge, major things were happening concerning race and all of that stuff was going on at the same time. That's major. And it's kind of makes you upset that it's not treated as a huge thing as the MLK movement. It's kind of just as big, if bigger.
Right. I mean, that gets into who tells history, what's in the history books you get at school, and that's really important too. I don't know if you guys know, but Texas has been the epicenter of a lot lately in terms of laws that are surprising. But one of them is there's been a lot of controversy about Texas textbooks and the type of history they want to tell. And some of it is not including this history. And there was a recent example of a Texas textbook where a mother caught that they were talking about slaves, and they referred to them as workers in this textbook. So there's a whole lot of debate about even history textbooks and what's told and what's not told, and it's important that we know our history. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Just to add on to that, I mean, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I read that similar article about it, and it was McGraw Hill, who was one of the big textbook companies, and I remember reading about them in high school. Those were the books that we had, were McGraw Hill books. So yeah.
It's true. Anybody else? Comments, questions? One or two people that I can tell you about in terms of, there was really no mention at all of Chicago. A couple of names that I want to know, if you know a little bit about our history. Juan Andrade. Some of you might have heard of usually USHLI, the U.S. Hispanic Leadership Institute. I know you. And so, although he's originally from Texas, he's been in Chicago 30, 40 years. And he actually started with the Southwest Voter Group that they talked about. And basically, USHLI usually is pretty much doing the same here in the Midwest and now across the nation to encourage Latinos to vote, and also to encourage Latinos to run for office, because that's still an ongoing issue. In fact, my sister is also, I'm a journalist, but she's an advocate. She works for a nonprofit. She's director of the Latino Policy Forum. In fact, they had a breakfast this morning with some speakers, including Chuy Garcia, who, as you may know, ran for mayor, which was a pretty significant thing. And he and another gentleman with an organization called Latino Victory that's working to register Latino voters across the U.S. And they were just talking about the importance of voting and how this is really, really an important moment for Latinos. Are we really going to come out and vote? People talk about this sleeping giant, which some people say is kind of offensive. Like, we're not a sleeping giant, we're here, but it's not just Latinos. Most people don't vote. Only 30 to 40% of people vote. And other countries in the world, like, you're required to vote. Like in Peru, you have to vote, or it's just automatic voter registration. It's not optional. And actually, there are some states looking at automatic voter registration. But some people don't really want that because who has power? Who are the demographic groups growing in the United States? Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans. And oh, wonderful. That's great. Here's voter registration. So that's really important too. Just they were talking about this morning in this conversation about just the importance of voting, and especially there are a lot of states who have passed laws to try and restrict voter rights. One of the gentlemen who spoke this morning said his brother is disabled. And I don't remember exactly what kind of ID he had, but he's always voted anyway. And but under the new Texas voter laws, like, the ID he has doesn't count. And another thing they said is, like, the University of Texas student ID is actually a legal state ID, but they won't accept it for voting. So this is really, a lot is really at stake. So even if you forget my name and you forget what this documentary is called, if I could just please tell you, please, if you're over 18, vote. Tell your friends to vote. It's probably, it's more important now than ever. A lot is at stake. A lot is at stake that affects you, whether you have, people who are impacted by immigration laws, education, student loans. It just on and on and on. So much is at stake, and so it's really important to vote. And the Latino vote, especially the young vote, is important. I think I saw a stat like every month 30,000 Latinos turn 18 in the United States. That's huge. If they all registered to vote, then when politicians say whatever they are, whether you're Republican or Democrat, whatever they said, like, you would have a voice. And that's the problem, that not for too long, Americans in general are kind of apathetic about voting. And so I really hope that with this new generation that they don't really, do they teach you the importance of voting in high school? Not really? No? No? Yes, you back? They did? Oh, well, that's good. That's good to hear. I wasn't sure if they did that. But, it's really important. Your vote matters. And sometimes, people don't vote because they say, oh, I don't like this person. And, no person is perfect. Like, no politician is perfect. Like, no life partner or person that you fall in love with will be perfect either, right? So, we're all human, we're all flawed, but you just have to decide which of these candidates has the policies that I most agree with. And there may be something that you don't like about this person, but there's nothing worse than just complaining and not voting. So you just have to do your research and find out which candidates you agree with most and vote, because that's probably the most important thing you can do as a civic duty. Any other questions? Let's see. Oh, one other person that I can mention for you guys is Rudy Lozano. In fact, the event that you're going to have later this month is at the Rudy Lozano Library. He was a really well-known activist in the late 70s, early 80s in Chicago. He ran for alderman. He lost, but he was actually murdered, and it's kind of a mystery as to what happened. It was quite controversial. I know I can't say for certain what happened, but it's his story. There's a short book about him, and his story is really worth researching and reading about, because he was one of the early. He was friends with Harold Washington, and he could have been one of the early Latino aldermen. Another kind of odd fact I found out was that there was a gentleman named William Rodriguez who reportedly was the first Latino alderman, but he was of Spanish heritage, so I don't know if you count being from Spain as Hispanic or not. But he actually was a socialist and ran for mayor in like the 19 teens of Chicago, so that's kind of interesting backstory there too. So, any other questions? All right, well, again, just please register to vote. I'm not telling you who to vote for, but that's the one thing hopefully I can leave you with today.
Okay, so I passed around some voter registration forms that you just happen to have. We register people, or we help people register to vote every year for Constitution Day. You just have to put a stamp on that, drop it in the mailbox. There's a mail box in the lobby of the 6th floor building, that brass one. It actually does function. The mail chute doesn't go. And when you first go to vote, you'll have to bring some, not ID, but proof of residence. That can be a utility bill, a cell phone bill, correspondence with the college, a lease, anything like that. That's number one. Number two, be sure to fill out the survey. That helps us make better programming that you guys would like. It also tells the NEH and the ALA that we spent their money wisely. We love to prove that to them. We get more money than maybe, fingers crossed. And we have a drawing, so if you want to, everybody,
Did everybody put their ticket in there? Somebody pass it around.
oh, one more?
Oh, there's a few more. We'll start coming back. Also, just in case you're interested, some of the classes I teach and what I'm teaching next semester, I teach a blogging class. I use a lot of new media, and that's, you have to just be a junior, 60 credits or more to take it in major. I also teach social media and journalism and social media storytelling, which is trying to take the class. So, and especially for one of the classes, if you're interested, just email me, but especially the 1000 level class, there are no prerequisites.
So you would have gotten one, and then Kim kept one and put it in the jar. So it should
Did
be
everybody
okay.
put theirs in?
No, you hold on to yours, and we have the other one, the matching one. So first drawing for the book.
Oh no.
Free book.
493.
493. Yay!
I'm so
And the next one is for the DVD set, the full set of the documentary series we just saw. So,
505.
505. Nice.
Professor Teresa
Okay, guys, thanks for coming. Feel free to linger, to have some more popcorn, to chat. Yeah. Yeah, I can take your surveys. You can just drop them on the table at the front if you want to do that.
What time is it at?
Yeah.
Yes. I get off from work at 4. We're at 5.
Just because we're doing the special dedication to former students. We'll try to get here, and I'll send a picture. I don't know if
Which language is this? What movie was this? Surprise. I hate Jane Austen.